Hi, Kia. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Jamie?
Good, thanks. Thanks for coming on the podcast today. We were just chatting beforehand about how it's been like a bit of a rough week for both of us and with
Yeah, I
COVID
think
and all the things.
just a rough year for everybody, and we're just almost coming up on the end of the first month. So everyone's hanging in there, I think, and I think it's also okay to acknowledge that we're all just kind of hanging in there. But yeah, it was nice talking to you a little bit before about that and getting on that personal level.
Yeah, totally. And I was saying to you before, full moment of transparency and vulnerability. Today for me is a cry day. So after this podcast, I will probably take some time and cry, potentially on the floor, on my bed. It's just one of those days where you wake up and you're like, I need to cry today.
Yeah, and it's totally okay. It's actually Bell Let's Talk Day in Canada, where we talk about mental health and it's kind of ending the stigma. So yeah, we're all about talking about that and saying it's okay to cry. It's okay to talk about
Yeah.
those things too.
It's not only okay, it's healthy,
Yeah,
which is
that's
awesome.
true.
Um, so let's get into our first segment of the podcast. Tell us about your pet peeve.
Okay, so I know when you asked me about this, I've done a lot of thinking because it's like, oh, there's so many like little things that really just irritate me. So I'm kind of like a type, I'm not kind of like, I am a type A personality. So I like things the way I like them. So I'm like, oh, I could talk about this, I could talk about that. But when it came down to it, the thing that just really makes me go like, ugh, is, and it's going to be weird, but it's the kitchen sponge. So, you know, the sponge you wash your dishes with or whatever. So I love wringing it out really well and leaving it out to dry. But my fiance doesn't understand that concept and he will leave the sponge in the bottom of the sink still wet and gross. And when I walk by and I see that, like I just want to just like scream, like I don't know, it just really like that's something that just irritates the heck out of me, and I bring it up all the time. He's like, oh well, like, why does it really matter? And it's like, it matters for so many reasons. And so that's the kind of one I could think of, but again, I have a huge list of just little things that I could talk about, but that one always comes, like whenever I see it, it really gets my blood boiling.
Yes, I have those ones as well. I'm trying to think if I have any of like the cleaning ones. Um, I'll circle back if I can remember. But I understand. I'm actually probably more like your fiance, to be honest. But I because I actually it's so funny you say it because I don't actually like dry sponges. I think when they get really dry and crusty, that
Crusty.
grosses me out.
Oh, that's what I want. I don't want it to be wet and soggy and oh.
This is just and I love this like differences in people and yeah.
What makes us just, yeah, go nuts.
Yeah. Well, kind of circling into our next segment, one of the reasons why I got you on the podcast is you have an amazing account,
Thank you.
obviously, and you're an amazing person. And this whole, what I love about your account, what I love about what you're doing is from a super educated point of view, you're talking about the link between inflammation and chronic illness and autoimmune conditions, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And I want to get you on the podcast to chat about that because a lot of us struggle with inflammation, autoimmune conditions, um, and it's a very complicated, complex issue, right?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
So
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about your background in that space.
Yeah. So that's a good question. And that's how I was going to start anyway, was because you're right. It's really hard to understand autoimmunity, and current research, they don't understand it that well either. And it's because it's so complex. Our immune systems are so complex. And I've always been interested in the human body. I've always been interested in science. And my first degree was actually in medical science, and I did an undergraduate degree in physiology, human physiology. And then I went on to do a master's degree in physiology and pharmacology for the same reason. I was really interested in medical science and all of those things. And I was really interested in the human body. And it was during my master's degree that I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis.
Mm.
And I had my huge flare up and I was so stressed. And I was like, what is happening to my body? And I was working a lot of long hours, and I was pushing myself, and I was going through a lot of personal things in my family life that was happening. And I was just so stressed all the time. And I think that has a big trigger to why my autoimmune disease manifested. And through that, I ended up defending my master's. But it's when I fell in love with nutrition, because I was digging. I knew how to read scientific literature from my master's degree training. I knew how to understand these things. And I dug into the literature and I read so much about it. And I started learning about anti-inflammatory diets, and I started learning about inflammation, and I started learning about your microbiome in your gut. And then that kind of led me to pursue the degree I'm in now, which is nutrition and dietetics. And I'm in my final year of that degree. So that's kind of like my background, I guess, of like why I love the science and why my page is so focused on the science. I love science. I think it's so interesting, and I definitely have that skill to break down the science so that everyone can understand it, because it's not easy to understand.
Yes, I love that. And here's what I love about that is a lot of us have in the chronic illness community are gaslighted by doctors, by scientists, or whatever. But to have someone come into the community or who is part of the community that understands the science behind a lot of these things is, I think it's so good, because you bring that perspective of someone with a chronic illness. And we need more of that. We need more of that in the medical field, because so many times doctors will look at someone with a chronic illness and be like, oh, you have anxiety, or you because they can't see what the actual issue is. But then as a patient, it's like we all have thoughts and ideas around our own conditions, but let's be honest, half the time it's not backed up by research or science, which isn't necessarily bad, but it's what we feel, it's what we've experienced, which is also valid.
Yes.
But
yeah.
from a medical perspective, it's not valid.
It's hard, and I think the thing comes in that we don't know how to describe what's happening to our bodies.
Yeah.
And I know when I was going to the doctor and trying to navigate my diagnosis, I think part of the reason why I got my diagnosis in 3 months after my symptoms started, which is very fast, like comparatively to other people. But when I went into my doctor's appointments, I knew how to communicate with them. I knew terminology. I knew how to describe what was happening. I had documented my symptoms because of my science background. I wanted to show them like a lab book, like here's a lab book. This is what's happening to my body. And I think that really helped me in communicating with the doctor how I felt, because I knew the words to describe it. Where I think a lot of people, we just don't know how to describe what's happening to our body, because when you feel pain all over, you're just like, pain everywhere. That's what I feel. But how do you communicate that to a doctor so that they take you seriously?
Yeah, and that's one of the big questions, because not everyone has a science background, right? Not everyone has that capacity. Even myself, like I'm just now 4 years later getting to the point where I can feel comfortable talking about my health, my limitations, communicating with people. And then also on top of that, still feeling like I'm a valuable person despite my limitations.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like this whole thing. But you're so right. I think it also comes down to communication. And once I kind of figured out my diagnosis, when I saw doctors, it was like as soon as I caught a hint of being gaslighted, I moved on and I saw people that actually listened to me and helped me. But yeah, it's this whole complex issue. And again, I'm so glad that you're in the community, and we need more of that. I have another friend who's based in Sydney. She's an exercise physiologist.
Oh, awesome. Yeah.
Or she's studying to be an exercise physiologist, and she has chronic migraines, and she's amazing because she's bringing that science she's around exercise to the community, and it's from a scientific, very educated point of view, as opposed to just your experience. And again, that's also fine, because that's what I share myself, and that's what a lot of people share. So
well, yeah, the experience is so important too, because that's what resonates with people. Because then when you start sharing your experiences, someone's like, oh, that's how I felt, but I didn't know I was feeling that way. So I think, yeah, communicating even our experiences are a huge part of it too, and very valid.
Yeah, exactly. And so going back to the inflammation sort of side of things and your background at that, what's the link between gut health and autoimmunity?
Yeah, so this is kind of where I really fell in love with the science and where I really fell in love with the nutrition piece, is through the gut health. And a lot of research is emerging in this area because they're starting to figure out that your gut has a huge role to play in your overall health. It
Yeah.
has a role to play in your mental health. It has a role to play in your physical health, like all of those things. And it's interesting because those who are, they're not sure. The research isn't sure. It's kind of like think of a chicken or the egg, what came first. Those who are diagnosed with autoimmune diseases present with what they kind of call is like leaky gut, or they have an imbalance in their microbiome,
Yeah.
but they're not sure if the imbalance in gut bacteria causes autoimmune diseases or if autoimmune diseases are causing the imbalance in the gut. So they don't know which one is which, but they do know that when you can contribute to balancing your gut health and really improving that balance of good and bad bacteria in your gut, you can have less inflammation and you can experience like decreased symptoms of autoimmunity. So I just became really interested because it's like, well, how do we fix our guts then? If that's how we can help ourselves add one more layer of care. It's not a cure, but it's another layer of care that we can take, and it's through our diet. And that's why I kind of went back to school, because I was like, there's no one really talking to us. No one talked to me about diet when I was diagnosed and what a sustainable approach looked like. And so I said, we need this in our community. So I just decided to go back to school and be that person in this community. And there's other reasons why I wanted to go into nutrition and dietetics as well, for diabetes specifically, from my First Nations background too. So I had just lots of factors that are like, this is the path you need to pursue. And so that's why I went back to school, is kind of learning all about this gut health and the science behind it and nutrition
Yeah.
there. I find it so interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. And so I'm like, have so many questions about this.
Yeah.
First two questions: do they know what causes leaky gut and autoimmune conditions? So they obviously don't know which is triggering the other, but do they know what causes one or the other?
No, and that's it's not so simple. It's not like this is what causes it. It's
Yeah.
three kind of factors. So you're always going to see a genetic component, a lifestyle component, and then like a diet component, or that. So what it is we all are born with a set of genes, and those are like your DNA. It's what you're born with, and they kind of are programmed to be a certain way. But certain genes are turned on and off, but your environment has a big influence for whether those genes are turned on or off or not. So with autoimmune disease, you might have a
Yeah.
gene that is going to express your autoimmune disease, but in order to be turned on, you need something in your environment to happen. So something like being exposed to toxins or
Yeah.
viruses, or stress, trauma, those things, like a really poor diet, and or the gut health comes into there. But and that's what it is. It's kind of all of these factors coming into one, and it's not just one factor. And the same for your gut health is an imbalance in your gut health is it's triggered by stress, lack of sleep, and mental health, and all of those different things, those lifestyle factors, all can come into play with that. So yeah, it's not just one thing. It's always kind of like the three: your genetics, your environment, your diet, your lifestyle,
Yeah.
those kind of things. Yeah.
And so it sounds like with the gene can be activated or turned on, right?
Hmm.
Can it be turned off once it's been turned on?
So once it's not, it's kind of like our diseases, right? Once we have an autoimmune disease, we can't cure it. But the
Mm.
goal of treatment for autoimmune diseases is to get into remission, and that's through conventional medicine and a lifestyle approach. And so that would be remission, but you still have your disease.
Okay.
That's the best I can describe it. Yeah.
That's really interesting and a very educational understanding like the different factors and um yeah. Wow, mind blown. So
It's a lot of science, I know. So I hope that I
no,
didn't like overwhelm or confuse, because sometimes I get really excited and then my brain and I turn into a nerd. And
no, well here's what I've learned as well in my journey is knowledge is power. So the more we're educated about and about our conditions and what's behind that, the better. And even if that does mean like really scientific kind of jargon, or that
Mhm.
it's something like, oh, my disease can't be cured, but it can go into remission, which is awesome. Like that's
Mhm.
such a, like if we know that our disease can go into remission, like that's such a massive thing. So what in next question, what is the role of diet in chronic inflammation, going off of what you just said?
Yeah. So I'm not an expert in this, so I have to put that out there. And I'm just a student as well in nutrition and dietetics. So what it is like I have the understanding of it, and your diet is used to it can be used to help balance your microbiome, and foods have certain properties as well. There's some evidence that suggests certain foods are pro-inflammatory and certain foods are anti-inflammatory. There's also evidence to show that these foods promote gut health and these foods can cause that imbalance in your gut health. And what the whole role of like kind of what nutrition is that's that layer of care. So we're going back to like the remission. What conventional medicine is to put you in remission. It's that aggressive treatment to turn down your immune system from attacking your body. But then after that, diet is that complementary piece. It's not meant to be a cure. It's not meant to replace conventional medicine. It's meant to be used in combination. So you
Yeah.
can think about it as conventional medicine is going to put you in remission and it's going to make you to live a long life. Diet then is what's going to make you thrive. It's what's going to, you can, they've seen once you clean up the diet, then you can have, like, patients were seen to have lower doses of medication needed or stuff like that. They feel better. And there's certain things you can do that do that. And what I find is really interesting is the gut health piece of it, is like what foods feed our good bacteria, because what our bacteria eat in our guts, then they produce metabolites, and those are compounds, and those compounds go into our body, and a lot of those compounds can be anti-inflammatory.
Okay.
So if you think about a really good thing is fiber. So fiber is what feeds your gut bugs. Your gut bugs love to eat fiber. So when you eat fiber, they're super happy, they're dancing around, and they produce what's called short chain fatty acids. And those are anti-inflammatory, and your body takes those up. They're cardioprotective. They promote good health. So we want to feed those good bacteria. So they're like a party in our gut. They're helping us out as well. So that's kind of, I know I go off on little tangents here. So always you can
No,
rein
no,
me
no,
back
no. That's
if I'm
good.
going off crazy.
No, I love that. And I just have a question because you're talking about diet and conventional medicine. Um, I have a question because I have talked to so many people in the community and I've had this experience myself. I think conventional medicine is so important. In
Mm-hmm.
my journey, conventional medicine failed me. Does that make sense? And I don't
Yeah.
want to like, I'm not against it. I'm more in the train of like that works for a lot of people, and I
Yeah.
think a lot of people need to take medication and it's so good. But then there's the camp where conventional medicine doesn't work. Like for example, I react to the majority of pharmaceuticals. So
Mm-hmm.
I guess, do you feel that non-conventional or naturopathy has a role in the chronic illness journey? And sorry if I'm putting you on the spot. I'm so keen to hear your opinion on it.
No, this is a great question because I think about this all the time. And well, for one, I resonate a lot with what you say is your body just doesn't like medication, and neither does mine. So when I was first diagnosed, they started me on methotrexate and hydroxychloroquine. And 2 months after being on that, my body did not like methotrexate. I got very sick. And so I was taken off. I was put on sulfasalazine. Body didn't like that either. So I had to be taken off that medication. And that's where I was like, there has to be something else. What else can I do to compensate for my body not liking medication? And even my rheumatologist says, she's
Yeah.
like, your body is just sensitive to medications. And that's kind of where my opinion is that conventional medicine is needed, like those drugs are needed and stuff, but at the end of the day it comes down to what's best for the patient, and it's
Yeah.
supposed to, or it should be, patient-centered care. And that's what I stand very firmly on. Is there's this thing where if a patient doesn't believe a medication is going to work, chances are it's not going to work. That has been shown in research studies that like your belief to how the medication will affect you impacts how it will actually affect you. If you don't believe it's going to work, it's not going to work.
Wow.
At the end of the day, you need to do something that it works with your beliefs and your morals and your values. And it's actually naturopathic medicine is increasing. So the number of people seeking out naturopathic medicine is huge. And I think it's very huge in the chronic illness community because it's for the same reason. Our medications come with a lot of side effects. And before I actually came on this podcast, I was just reading a paper, and it was about developing the ITIS diet and how they opened the research paper, the research study was saying that patients with rheumatoid arthritis, because it was specific to that population, they're looking for alternatives because their medications come with so many side effects.
Yeah.
And so I think that what's important is to raise that awareness in our community, and especially in the medical world. And that's part of mine, is I want to advocate for more focus on nutrition, more focus on that prevention and complementary thing in conventional medicine, so that they're better intertwined. It's that integrative, holistic approach. But I hear it all the time, and I'm sure you do too, it's that we want something else. We don't want to just be full of drugs. We don't want to just try another drug. Like, what else is there? And I think we need to be educated on what is best for us, because often when, I've seen so many spoonies, they go out on their own and they just start trying, random things that are not backed by evidence that could potentially hurt them, but because they want something else, but nobody's there to educate them on these things. And that's where you need to be the right professional for it, so that you don't do any harm.
So, well, and you make such a good point. No, it's good. You make such a good point because, and this is an issue that I experience. Like, if you look at a lot of Americans, for example, that live with chronic illness, I don't know what it's like in Canada. I know it's a little bit better in Australia, but even here, seeing a naturopath isn't covered by insurance or Medicare. Mm-hmm. And so then there's like this whole component, this stress of like, okay, I'm going to try all these things because I don't actually have the money to see a naturopath who has that experience in the different supplements to be able to give me the right combination of supplements. Because when I saw my naturopath in the US, she gave me heaps of supplements, but she said, here's how much you take of this, here's what time of day you take, and make sure you don't take this with this, and all of that sort of thing. So it's definitely a massive thing that if we can move, like, they have more of this integrative approach, that could be so helpful for people in the chronic illness community.
And that's covered. And bring up that point that you brought up, that it's not covered. A lot of the naturopathic or complementary alternative medicines is what they're called, is it's not covered. So that's what patients want, or that's what spoonies want, that's what we want, but it's not covered. And that's it's not accessible. And that's where I think more advocacy needs to happen, and just more access to these things, just to improve the quality of life. And there's so many disadvantages that we have to overcome being someone with a chronic illness, but we're always advocating for ourselves, always. And it's tough because we're exhausted just to begin with,
and I think what gets to me personally is, now that I'm on kind of the other side of my chronic illness, even though I still struggle with chronic pain, I don't have the chronic fatigue anymore. So I'm looking back at my past self, who was very unwell, totally new to everything. And I'm just thinking, what if she had someone like me or someone like you, that she could listen to this podcast and she could be part of this community and realize that she had a voice, and that it was okay to be unwell, and it was okay to communicate that, because half the people in my life didn't realize I was sick, like I was that bad. They thought I was being lazy. And there's part of the issue with that is lack of awareness. Part of the issue is that I didn't know how to communicate. Part of the issue is that I should have just been seen by the people around me. They should
Yeah.
have tried to understand.
Yeah.
So there's like, it's like not anybody's fault necessarily, but it's like, yeah, it's like we're here for the people because we have a level of awareness and a level of understanding and energy, right? To have this advocacy, and so we're here for the people that can't. Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense. And I love what you said about I just want to be the person I didn't have, because
Yeah.
that's exactly why I run my page on Instagram. That's why I'm pursuing my degree, is I don't want someone to go through the confusion, the loneliness that I went through. I want to be that person who I didn't have, so that even if I help one person not become in that place that I was, then that's good. That's good enough for me. I lived a good life. So
Yeah, totally. Oh, I feel so inspired right now by like both of us.
we just need the whole community come into this podcast with us, and
Yeah.
it's okay.
Yeah, I love this. Just circling back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of gut health, I did have a question that came up while you were
Yeah,
talking, and one that is okay, and this is a little bit random. Prebiotics versus probiotics. Do you know much about that?
I do know quite a bit about that. Yes.
Okay,
So
so
yeah.
the reason why I'm asking is because I've actually heard this whole prebiotics versus probiotics. What is the difference?
That's
And
what?
are
It's a good question.
yeah, and what's the difference in like is it worth taking probiotics and prebiotics? How does that affect gut health, etc.?
Yeah. So I have like really simple explanations for this that I think will help a lot of people understand it, because it's confusing, especially I think recently within the past few years, everything's probiotics this, probiotics that, and it confuses us because it's like, should I be taking that? I don't know. Like, it's no one talks about what it actually does. So a probiotic is the bacteria. So if you take a probiotic, it's the little bugs, they're traveling in, and the whole point is you want to get them to flourish in your gut. Prebiotics then are the food, and it's coming back to that piece I talked about in the beginning, which is it's fiber. That's what your bacteria like to eat, and it's your good bacteria. So you want to feed those good bacteria with prebiotics. And all prebiotics are fiber, but not all fiber are prebiotics. So that's kind of the confusing piece. But coming back to that kind of garden analogy, if you're taking a probiotic, but you're not feeding those gut bacteria with prebiotics, the probiotics just die. They don't thrive.
Okay.
It's like your garden. You can plant flowers in your garden, but if you don't water them and you don't give them soil, they're just going to die. So it's more important to focus on the prebiotics than the probiotics. And probiotics, they're not supposed to be taken long term. And the other thing that research has shown is that when you're taking a probiotic and you're taking it and you stop, your gut bacteria go back to how it was before taking that probiotic. So
Okay.
I always like, with the world of dietetics, we always focus on food first. There are certain illnesses that benefit from probiotics, like a lot. But the thing with probiotics is they're specific to person and disease state, because each person has a unique microbiome. My gut bacteria are different than your gut bacteria. It's like our fingerprint. Every person has different microbes floating around in their gut. And we need a probiotic that's kind of individualized to us and our condition. So that's where it gets really confusing. But everybody responds to the same prebiotic fibers. So the best thing you can do to nourish your gut health is focus on prebiotic fibers, because then those feed the good bacteria. The good bacteria then produce metabolites that are anti-inflammatory and gut healing. And they create a stronger gut. And that can be one part of decreasing your inflammation.
That's so good. I'm glad I asked that question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even with the probiotics, like I did take them when I was quite ill. I don't take them anymore. because it gets expensive as well. If you want a good probiotic, it's very expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's really educational. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm very like
Um,
I love all things gut, so
yeah, so prebiotics in the form of fiber, which would be what's an example of that?
yeah. Yeah, so good examples are like onions, garlic. Those are prebiotic fibers. Artichokes, Jerusalem artichokes, are prebiotic fibers. And it's a lot of your like your FODMAP foods. A lot of those which are kind of irritants to people with IBS or irritable bowel syndrome are prebiotic fibers.
Okay.
So it can sometimes be difficult for those people, and it's very confusing, and that's where you need to get to work with the dietitian to figure out those intolerances and help you figure out what those sensitivities are. But yes, there's a few prebiotic fibers with the onions and the garlic are really good ones, and I'm kind of just drawing a blank right now on other ones. The artichokes. This is what happens when you have so much going on in your brain. But yeah, so there's lots of prebiotics. Oats are a great one. Oats are a good
Okay.
one. Yeah.
Okay, good to know. Wow, I'm just like, I feel so good. And this kind of leads into our next sort of point, which is this idea that knowledge is power, which we kind of
Yeah.
touched on earlier in the episode, is like, what are your thoughts around using knowledge as power to embrace your chronic illness?
Yeah. And I'm glad this is a great way to kind of tie it up, I think. And it's kind of, is knowledge is power because the more you know about your disease, the easier it becomes to describe what's happening to you. And it also allows you to kind of take back control. So, like with myself, when I went back to school and studied nutrition, and because of my degree, and I dug into all the scientific literature, I was able to equip myself with knowledge. And what that knowledge did was it gave me understanding. And once we understand something, it's not as scary. And because there's less unknowns about what's happening to us, and it also allows us to make choices. So, making an informed choice, whereas like every day I wake up, I can make choices that either decrease my inflammation or increase my inflammation. I can every day make choices that I know will trigger a flare or not. But it all comes from a place of empowerment. And, maybe if my favorite thing is to, enjoy pizza on a Friday night for date night with my fiance, but I know that, okay, this contains foods that are going to make me trigger. That's okay. I'm empowered in that. I'm going to make that decision. So if the next day I'm not feeling well, I know I made that choice. And so that's kind of like the
Yeah.
knowledge is power, is like knowing your triggers, knowing what sets you off, knowing your boundaries. So when you push them, you have that knowledge of empowerment. Well, I chose to make that choice. That's why I feel this way. That's okay.
Yeah.
Or you're like, I have something important the next day, so I'm not going to make that choice. So the more you listen to your body and you get knowledge about what's happening to it, you can make choices and more informed choices. And it just, that's what made it easier for me. So I don't know if that resonates with you at all, but that's kind of my
Yeah.
point of view.
No, it totally does. And how do you go about getting knowledge and kind of educating yourself about your own condition?
So the science, I always go to the science first. So that's where I'll do a literature search if I'm okay. I want to know what this food does or what's the latest on anti-inflammatory diets because it's always changing. I'll dive into the literature and I'll do that. And that's more from just my training in my master's degree to do that. But the other thing is listening. I like to listen. So I've learned a lot from listening to other people's stories, and that's on all
Yeah.
forms of social media, podcasts, Instagram, Facebook. I just listen to I want to hear their experience to see, okay, how are they dealing with this? What's happening to them? Because a lot of times I'll hear someone say something, it's like, I felt that, but I never really brought that awareness to feeling that way. So the knowledge is just listening to others. And there's so much power in just listening.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I've mentioned this before as well. When I was living with chronic fatigue, there was not a lot of podcasts or anything around chronic fatigue syndrome, and this was around 4 years ago. And so I went onto this dodgiest website with just like this like video, like an embedded audio file into the website page about different people on a phone conversation talking about how they recovered from chronic fatigue syndrome. And I listened to that, and at the time I was in the US, so I think I listened to someone in the UK, someone in Australia, and someone like a couple people in America or something. And I remember thinking, this is the only information I found on the whole entire internet that talks about people recovering from chronic fatigue and what they did. And
Yeah.
I was just like, yeah, knowledge is power, experience is power, sharing your experiences is power. And I love this conversation. I love what you're saying, and thanks so much for coming on.
No, thanks for having me. I was super excited when you reached out because it's like this helps me too. This helps me be a better communicator as well.
Mhm.
So it's only you're making me better as a person just by having me here.
It's a win-win. Um, do you have any recommendations for the community around like what you're reading at the moment, watching, listening to?
Yeah, so currently, like honestly, I think the best thing that I'm doing right now is there's this great chronic illness community on TikTok. I don't know if you're on TikTok or not, but it's like
Uh,
it's booming. It's like up and coming, and I find that it's been very raw. People who are sharing their stories, and I've come across a lot of accounts who they're more just documenting their chronic illness, and you kind of get to see a little snippet inside of their life. And
yeah, wow.
a lot of it's bringing me back because I've been in remission for quite a while now, and like I call like mini baby flares every once in a while, but I do pretty well. And sometimes I forget what that first year and a half of my diagnosis was like. I forget how awful it felt. I forget
Mm.
how much I was chasing that light at the end of the tunnel kind of mentality. And hearing those stories bring me back to that place and remember why I'm doing the work I'm doing, how it feels to be like that, and what are the needs of the community so that I can focus my attention there as well. So that's one of my places. And then my other thing is I've been really into listening to like gratitude and mindfulness podcasts. I don't have like a specific one, but every day I've just been searching up one when I walk my dog in the afternoon. And it just reminds me to practice a little gratitude, practice a little mindfulness, because practicing mindfulness decreases inflammation, and that's proven in
Yeah.
research. Hot topic right now. So that's what I've been trying to incorporate more in my life is more mindful practices throughout my day. So that's kind of my little what I've been doing.
Yeah, wow. Thanks for sharing. And on with TikTok, how do people get involved with the community in there? Would it just be through a hashtag or?
Yeah, through it would be through same thing as kind of Instagram is hashtags. And so if you're like new to TikTok and you go on there, you can go to the little it's like a discover page, and then you just search like it's chronic illness, or you can search autoimmune diseases, and then you can favorite the hashtags, and then it will start showing you all these accounts. And then the more you interact with those accounts, the more it will show you them on
Yeah,
TikTok, which I really
wow.
and yeah, I've seen so many, and everyone is just so I find so genuine on there. Where with Instagram, I sometimes feel it's like a highlight reel. Like even in the chronic illness community, sometimes I feel like it's not a super real and raw. Like sometimes it's a lot of curated content. Not always. Like there's people who are really good at bringing that raw aspect, but I find it's even more raw and real on TikTok, where it's a real look into it, and it's not someone's highlight reel. It's more look into okay, like
Yeah.
what's happening behind the camera, even though it's through camera. But
Yeah.
yeah, I
It's
know
good
it's
to
kind of
know.
yeah, but check it out. It's kind of cool. It's been a new thing for me for the last like month or so, and I've really enjoyed it. So
Yeah, I'll have to check it out. Well, thanks again for coming on the podcast, and we'll make sure and put all this information for those listening in the show notes and link Kia's profile on Instagram. Go follow her. She's amazing. So many resources, so much gold in her Instagram, and also your TikTok. We'll link your TikTok account.
yeah, sure. They're the same. They're the same handle. So
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. I've had so much fun, and this was great talking to you today.